In this video, we'll begin implementing gameplay for our VR game. The gameplay involves throwing balls at targets. So we should add a system that allows us to throw balls. The ball throwing gameplay will work like this. When we detect that the trigger has been pressed, we will instantiate a ball prefab, which will contain a rigid body and set it up with some initial velocity so that it moves forward away from the camera. Additionally, we'll make sure that when the balls are created, they are moving away directly from the camera forward. So if we are looking upwards, then the arc will be traveling upwards. But looking to the side, they'll move to the side. So they'll fly directly away from the user's point of vision. Let's get started by creating the ball thrower itself. First of all, I'll save my scene and call it main. Always be safe. Let's remove the trigger listener. Don't really need it. We'll add a new script to replace it called ball thrower. Create an add, and we'll open it up. The structure of the ball thrower script is quite similar to that of the trigger listener, in that when we get the start method called, we will find the GVR viewer and add to its onTrigger event a delegate that calls some function that throws a ball. Let's get rid of the update function because we don't need it. In start, we'll go find object of type GVR viewer dot onTrigger plus equals delegate, and we'll call a function called throw ball. Okay, let's create the throw ball function by moving the cursor into throw ball, pressing Option Enter, and choosing Create Method. We can also manually write it out by hand, but I like doing this. You may get a warning from Monodevelop saying there are certain C#6 refactoring operations that are not supported. Would you like to continue anyway? We'll say yes. We'll say, okay, let's create throw ball here. Now we can begin writing the code that creates and imparts initial velocity to the ball. First of all, we'll create a variable that stores a reference to the prefab that will instantiate. Up the top, doesn't have to be at the top, but traditionally it's at the top, we'll add a public game object called ball prefab. Additionally, we'll add a public float called ball speed. And I'll default that to 7.5. You may want to play with higher or lower versions, but we can do that in the inspector. In the throw ball function, we can now instantiate this prefab by saying var new ball equals game object instantiate ball prefab. We'll set the position of the new ball to our current position. New ball dot transform position equals this transform position, and new ball transform rotation equals this transform rotation. Next, we'll make sure that the ball is moving away from us. We'll do this by asking the new ball for its rigid body. We'll then ask that rigid body to apply a velocity. So let's get the body first by saying var new ball body equals new ball dot get component rigid body. We can calculate the velocity by taking our forward direction. Remember, the forward direction is the current point of view of the player, and multiplying that by the ball speed. So we'll say new ball body dot velocity equals this transform forward times ball speed. So this means it'll be moving at ball speed in this direction. Finally, we want balls to vanish from the scene after a few seconds. Otherwise, we'll end up with too many and the scene will get cluttered and we might get some performance issues. Probably not, unless we had literally tens of thousands of them, but also the scene would just look cluttered and it's not very tidy. We will destroy the new ball after 5 seconds. We're now all done implementing our ball thrower. Let's now create the ball prefab. So we'll go back into Unity and we'll create a new object. We'll do this by going to the game object menu and choosing 3D object sphere. Here's our sphere. We're going to make this a fairly small object, so we'll change its scale from 1 to 0.1. In the X, Y, and Z fields, we'll change them all to 0.1. Now it's become much smaller, so I'll zoom in on that. Because our ball thrower assumes that this object has a rigid body, we need to fulfill that part of the bargain by adding rigid body here. So clicking add component, type rigid body. Not rigid body 2D, but rigid body. Now we'll turn this ball into a prefab by dragging the object from the hierarchy into the assets folder. When I release the mouse button, a prefab file is created. Now I can get rid of the prefab from the scene by clicking on it and deleting it by pressing the Command Delete key or Control Delete. Now we'll go to our main camera and we'll drag the sphere prefab into the ball prefab here. Okay, let's test it out. We'll start the game by clicking the play button. And now, when I press the trigger by clicking the mouse button, we are throwing balls. Now that the balls are being thrown, we should give them a target. We should also give them a level to play around in, but that'll have to wait for later. For now, though, this is a really good start.